hello and welcome to the York Festival of Ideas. It's my great pleasure to welcome you in person today to the event Beauty Will Save the World, Reimagining the Everyday. I'm Dunn-McAfee. I'm a researcher in English literature and history of art here at the University of York, and I'll be chairing and kicking off today's series of short talks. So, Dostoevsky's 700-page novel The Idiot is one of those long, weighty 19th century portraits of life. More people have claimed to have read it than have actually read it. Prince Mishkin, the main character, does actually get called an idiot by most of the other characters in the novel. And there's this variation on a phrase. We never hear it directly from Prince Mishkin, but it is referred to by other characters on various occasions. Beauty saves the world. What on earth does that mean? If someone said this aloud in the real world, or had the audacity to use it as a caption for an Instagram post, I'd just think, good God, you sweet summer child, I wish you well, and how lovely it must be to be this naive. How wonderful to be that cheerful. I think you could be much less charitable than I'm being right now. It's all a little bit live, laugh, love. And for the avoidance of doubt, I think beauty is a really wonderful thing. Pleasure from perception, our emotional response to the aesthetic object, and appreciation of the subtle properties of the essential features of a thing. Marvellous stuff, really. Ennobling, exhilarating, exciting stuff. But who or what does beauty actually help? It's not unreasonable to ask, as the novel does, what beauty saves the world? Well, there's an obvious and not coincidental alignment between Dostoevsky, the novelist, and Mishkin, his character. In 1849, our writer and his circle were arrested and sentenced to death by firing squad for criticising Russian politics and religion. Dostoevsky was actually in the middle of being tied to a wooden post, about to be executed, when a letter arrived commuting his sentence to hard labour. Better than dead, I suppose. The experience of existing on the brink, of coming back, of being on the edge and not quite going over, feeds into the idiot. Mishkin recounts the story of a young man who undergoes something very similar, describing it from a victim's point of view. He says, 3 minutes before his expected death, he notices the gilded spire of a nearby church and how it glitters in the sun. He'd never before realised how entrancing a glint of sunlight could be, and he is filled with this immense, deep love of the world. And then, just then, the stay of execution arrives. What might it feel like to bound and bounce through life with such an overwhelming sense of generosity and gratitude to the everyday? What would it be like if we gave humdrum things like sunlight on buildings the kind of care and attention that maybe they deserve? Well, you'd start to appreciate all the things in life that could delight us, rather than just tuning out entirely or saving your attention for the finest examples of aesthetic pleasure, of visual joy, of pretty things. And suddenly, the idea that beauty might save the world doesn't seem so rum. During the COVID-19 pandemic, conventional centres of beauty, such as galleries, museums, and theatres, had to shut their doors. Cut off from family, friends, social life, cultural life, millions of us had to make do with the world as it is. The everyday, the pedestrian, the seemingly ordinary, the often taken for granted. And rebuilding after the pandemic, I think, means retaining some of those aspects that we discovered during the pandemic, during lockdown and restrictions, which were a mixture of terror and dullness. And that is, I think enjoying small things and enjoying the everyday can be part of our present. So what things in our everyday lives might take on a kind of beauty if we gave them our real undivided attention? Well, since paintings come to mind when I say the word beauty, and I work partly on painting as well as poetry, it's much more fun to make this argument visually. Therefore, allow me to make some small comparisons between famous artworks and the everyday to make my point. The Irish dry stout, Guinness, is characterised by its distinctive colour, texture and rich roasted flavour. At the risk of launching into a love song about pints, if I wanted to pick apart the beauty of Guinness, I might say that it's visually stunning, with its dark ebony colour, thick creamy head. Indeed, it has a visible texture, a thickness, quite unlike most drinks. But it's essentially this interplay between dark ebony colour and thick creamy head, between essentially the light and the dark. Art historians use the fancy Italian term chiaroscuro, that makes Guinness so aesthetically pleasing. It brings to mind, and bear with me here because I'm being 100% serious, Vermeer's masterpiece, Girl with a Pearl Earring. Now, I appreciate that these are slightly different mediums. There's a bit of a jump in price, and I don't see that many Dutch oil paintings down the pub. Indeed, I don't see that many pints of Guinness inside the gallery. But if we give Guinness the kind of attention that we might give to the artwork, we might well find some striking parallels. The painting depicts a young woman wearing a pearl earring, with soft lighting illuminating her face. The composition is characterised by a delicate balance of light and shadow, capturing the subtle beauty and serenity of the subject. All a bit pretentious. And there's more. The highlighted head of our two subjects, one a fabric turban or headscarf, the other foam, creates a movement from the top section of brightness to a middle section where light and dark mingle more freely, and then to a lower section where we find the darkest part of Vermeer's figure and our pint of stout. You could go further still, comparing the brightness of the pearl earring with the gleam of light on the harp branding on the pint glass, for instance. Alternatively, you might be quite taken by the band of light in the middle of the figure's shoulder and the base curvature of the glass. An eccentric comparison, I accept, on a hot evening. If we linger this much over the contrast between light and dark, well, the pint might be warm by the time we get to it. And perhaps taking pleasure over the small things, taking pleasure over everyday things, is always going to seem eccentric in the 21st century. So let's try again. In 2020, the Irish actor and fellow heartthrob Paul Mescal stepped out to pick up a couple of pink gins, an alcoholic ginger beer, and a bag of crisps. And because we are a totally normal country who were clearly coping well with the pandemic at the time, we all lost our tiny minds. Headlines ranged from the Mirror's Paul Mescal sets pulses racing in tight shorts as he pops out to buy booze, through to the broadsheet, our friend the Daily Telegraph, with Paul Mescal and the case of the missing shorts. Now, I'm not saying that this is everyone's first thoughts about the image, and I appreciate lots of people's thoughts and feelings on Paul Mescal are actually unprintable in this room. But when I really think about this daring interplay between sumptuous silky material and exposed flesh, the other person who comes to mind is, of course, the Victorian painter and poet Dante Gabriel Rossetti, subject of the current major exhibition at the Tate, Britain. In Bocca Baciata, which is the kissed mouth in English, the painting's power seems to come from this combination of exposure and concealment. And yes, what further unites these images is that they have both been discussed in explicitly erotic terms. No disrespect to Paul Mescal. In the painting, like the viral image of Mescal's legs, we get this elongated area of exposed flesh. The thick neck, for example, has a certain parallel with Paul Mescal's exposed thighs. We even get this narrower but lighter area where the flesh continues until her dress and his shoes break the long run of exposed body. Indeed, what we might call beautiful here is not the erotic, but proportionality, ratios, a real balance and interplay. Just enough exposure, just enough clothing, all on the right side of decency, of course, if the Daily Telegraph will print articles about it, but all a little bit daring. But this is getting too much, and maybe paying very close attention to things like Paul Mescal's legs will take me to a strange place and distract us from the really important things in life. So then, to the weightiest of topics, the upcoming Oscar contender, Barbie. Ahead of its release, a number of stills and trailers have saturated social media. One that caught my eye is this one, of Margot Robbie as Barbie, pulled up in the Barbie-mobile and meeting us with a direct, but not entirely confrontational, gaze. We can only assume she's taking Ken for a spin. It's an image that's predicated on shocking pinks and knowing winks, and its playfulness is enhanced if we linger over just how good and thoughtful the colour composition and framing is here. I pay tribute to the film's director, Greta Gerwig. John William Waterhouse's rich oil painting, The Sorceress, helps us with this task. Both images, I think, turn on this central pose. A leaning female figure, a sharp bend in the left elbow, an exposed arm and shoulder that is closer to us than any other part of the body, hands placed together, and a face at least half turned towards us. All this creates what I want to argue is a very small, condensed space for the action to play out, a space that draws our eye, a space that really rather arrests our attention. Equally, the lower portion of each image features a cold, hard, flat surface, a strong compositional line, of course, but also an artificial object, in one case a table, in another a car, that the sorceress and Barbie both lean on. While the light pink of the painting and the shocking pink of the film are handled differently here, I want to argue that they achieve a very similar thing. They set a striking colour palette for the shots. They emphasise, in turn, the exposed arm, the active faces of our two female figures. And this draws stark attention to the contrast between what the faces communicate, the malevolent scheming of Waterhouse's sorceress, and the unbridled joy of Barbie. We could continue. We might even think about how the painting and film frame or centre the face within the scene. And I could go on with increasingly eccentric, somewhat tenuous visual comparisons between artworks and the everyday. But for the sake of everyone's sanity and the fact I've run out of pop cultural references, I want to hand over to someone else. Dr. Taryn Bell is a researcher here at the University of York. Her PhD research analysed our ability to become emotionally attached to objects. She's interested in the links between people, emotions, and the objects we use every day, and her current research focuses on how archaeologists may look for emotional attachment in the past. She has published on the subject in Time and Mind, and is currently, and this is very impressive, co-editing a volume for Springer titled Attachment in Archaeology. Here to help us find love, beauty, and affection in everyday things, it's Taryn Bell.
Thank you for having me. So, this is my teddy bear, Norris. I've had him since the day I was born, and you probably can't see it from this distance, but if you saw him up close, you would tell. He's worn, he's scuffed, and he's tattered. You can see where my mum had to sew him up multiple times. You can see where he probably needs a little bit more sewing to be done. His fur isn't as soft as it used to be, and his nose, which used to feel all velvety, is now completely worn down from years of me hugging him to my chest as a toddler. Norris has accompanied me through all of life's adventures, through holiday, moving house, moving country, and everything in between. And for as long as I can remember, he's been a huge source of comfort to me. Even today, all I have to do is hug him to my chest, and I feel better. Norris is a classic example of what we would call an attachment object. He's an object to which I am emotionally attached. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about why or where our attachment to objects comes from, and why it helps us find beauty in even the most mundane of objects. It's really strange that we often underestimate our attachment to objects and the importance of those everyday objects around us. And that's because we often think about our attachment to objects as either childish or materialistic, or that it represents that there's something wrong with us. And this is reflected in a lot of the research that's been done on object attachment so far. Before my PhD, the majority of the research into object attachment focuses on children's attachment objects like teddy bears, or adults with conditions such as hoarding disorders or dementia. But there's an increasing body of research, including my own, that shows that object attachment is a normal part of human life. But why? This is kind of a weird behaviour, right? Norris can't do anything, he's great and all, but he can't give me a hug back. He can't say anything nice to me to make me feel better. It's a kind of strange behaviour. So where does this attachment to objects originate, and what is it about Norris that makes him so comforting? Well, to understand our attachment to objects, we have to understand our attachments in general. So I'm going to take you back a little bit further to understand what attachment is. All mammals, from everyone in this room to all the great apes to your pet dog, we all have something called an attachment system. Now, what this attachment system does is it leads us from the moment we are born to seek proximity to close others, to loved ones. From the moment we are born, when babies cry, they're looking for that proximity to their attachment figure. And proximity to your attachment figure is really, really important because it gives you those lovely feelings of comfort and security, which sound really, really vague, but are really integral to our well-being. This isn't just something that we do when we're young, though. Our attachment system is with us from cradle to grave. And your attachment figures will change throughout life as well. So your attachment figures could be your friends, romantic partners, even your own children and grandchildren in turn. This is something that drives us as humans, this need to connect to other people. And these attachments in turn have huge impacts on us. They influence how we see ourselves and how we see other people. They influence and they shape what we know as our internal working model, the way we view ourselves and the way we view the world around us. And this can have really, really massive benefits for us if we have good quality, what we call secure bonds with other people. It makes us better able to self-regulate our emotions, to kind of roll with the punches. If you're going through a bad day, if you have the knowledge that you have those secure attachment bonds, it reinforces those feelings of security and you're better able to get on with your day. We have an increased trust and empathy. We're even better able to care for other people if we have people caring for us. And there's even increased willingness to explore, whether that's going to a new country or just trying that new restaurant down the road where the food seems a little bit unusual, but you think you'll give it a go. However, people aren't always there for us, and they can't always provide the care that we need. We've all had that thing where your partner said just totally the wrong thing, or they've gone off and you're on your own and you're feeling a bit sad, and you know you can't rely on them. But luckily, humans seem to be unique as a species in that we've developed a really flexible attachment system and we can attach to all kinds of other things. A really common attachment relationship is our attachment to pets, and the lovely thing is we know our pets attach to us too, so they gain those same wonderful warm feelings when they're around us. Another one is our attachment to gods, our religious beliefs, deities. Any kind of belief system can be incredibly comforting. But what my research is focused on, being an archaeologist, is our attachment to inanimate objects. So in my PhD, I wanted to understand what causes object attachment so I could understand where archaeologists would be most likely to see it in the past. And it's pretty simple, actually. I hate to summarise 3 years' work as in it was pretty simple. It took a lot of work to get there. But what we found was that what causes object attachment seems to be two main things. I spent years studying this. We looked at age, we looked at gender, we looked at religion, we looked at your household makeup, we looked at what you've been doing last Tuesday, all of that stuff. And after all of those things, there are two main things that seem to cause object attachment. The first is what we call dispositional anxiety, i.e. you have a kind of anxious personality. This often comes from not having good quality attachment figures, unsurprisingly. So this is a kind of long-term cause of object attachment. But I also found that situational anxiety causes it too. So when you're in anxiety or stress-inducing situations, you're more likely to attach to an object. I actually did some studies a couple of years ago where I intentionally stressed people out to see what they do. Very fun for me as a researcher, not so much fun for the people who had to count backwards in multiples of 13 and all of that kind of thing. But this is really interesting because it suggests that we're using these objects to bolster ourselves, to make ourselves feel better. Now, what I would say is these factors make it far more likely to be attached to objects, but what I found is that object attachment is just a really, really common behaviour. Cross-culturally, this is not just unique to kind of British culture or Western cultures. About 70% of children have an attachment object, and my research suggests that up to 50% of adults have it too, but we do have a problem that people underreport because they are embarrassed to stand up in front of a room full of people and clutch a teddy bear. So if anything, I think that's probably a bit of an underestimate. Now, we often think about object attachment in relation to things like teddy bears, but these objects can be basically anything. So one thing that came up quite a lot, teddy bears, soft toys. Another one is jewellery, but obviously reflecting the fact that I looked at British audiences quite a lot, mugs. People love mugs. Many people have their own attachment mug that brings them a lot of comfort and security, but they can be basically anything. The reason that I decided to study object attachment is that archaeologists basically spend all their time looking at stuff like this, stuff that people leave behind, but they never talk about the emotional importance of these objects. It's like people in the past didn't feel a thing, they just completely ignore it, and to me, this seems like a massive oversight. I study people who lived 50,000 years ago, and to treat them as if they weren't thinking, feeling, emotional beings is just not doing them justice. Because these objects have these same benefits. By relying on these objects, by using them, we are able to self-regulate our emotions. It increases our trust and empathy. It increases our willingness to explore. There are huge, huge benefits. These objects can be anything at all, as I've said before. These attachment objects are really, really unique to us, and that's what I think is really wonderful about them. Because the importance in the objects isn't just about aesthetic beauty. Actually, it's not about aesthetic beauty at all. It's about what that object means to you. Often these objects are related at first to important people or events, but in time they take on a unique significance, a beauty that others don't see, even if we do. For me, Norris is the cutest bear in the world, but you might have your own teddy bears and think, oh, he's nothing in comparison. Attachment objects like Norris can seem really mundane to other people, but to those who have them, they're incredibly significant objects which have a huge impact on our lives. We have this amazing capacity to become emotionally attached to completely random objects that that other people might not care about at all. And with them, they remind us of the importance of finding beauty in the everyday. As I've said before, the beauty that we see in these objects is not just about aesthetics. It shapes our mind, it shapes our relationships with other people, it shapes the way we live our lives. Maybe beauty can't save the world, but finding the beauty in the everyday can save us just one day at a time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taryn, and thank you, Norris, a special guest for the evening. Our next speaker this evening is Anthony Tomkins. Anthony is a researcher in English literature here at the University of York. His research, funded by the White Rose College of Arts and Humanities, focuses on addiction narratives and athletic memoirs. More importantly, and perhaps his true vocation, he's a seasoned ultra-runner, running absurd distances and for hours at a time. Here to convince us devastatingly that exercise might be a good, even beautiful thing, it's Anthony Tomkins.
Hi everyone, so I'm Anthony. I think mine will be far more casual than the previous two, so just preparing you for that. And in the long tradition of Welsh people going soft at the mention of their grandmother, my attachment object is my nan's necklace that I never take off. And because of that, it has ripped my hair out on an almost daily basis when I go to sleep. So I'm constantly cleaning this chain. I'll start off by thanking Nicholas and the festival for having me, and for all the other panel members for taking part. I also hope we're covered by not getting sued by IKEA for stealing their slogan, "The Beautiful Every Day." They kind of had the commodity on that one. So go into this. I think Taryn mentioned this actually. Pottery also is another one of mine. This is a pot by a Welsh-Polish potter called Agnieszka Pol. She's based just outside where I'm from in Abergavenny. I think they're absolutely stunning. So when thinking about contributing to this idea, I had a few examples from my own everyday life where I think I kind of feel and experience beauty every day. Initially I came up with two things, so the first being this kind of crockery. I find that having breakfast with a kind of heavy ceramic mug and a bowl gives me a sense of emotional warmth. Having a tactile ceramic thing glazed with an artist's hand is really pleasing for me. The second thing I thought of was food and drink. So meals are kind of everyday junctures and opportunities to create something beautiful. So whether that be soup with crusty bread on a cold day, like symmetrical char lines on a barbecue, a chilled pint glass, they all have like the potential to heighten someone's day. And finally, just music. I'm obsessed with a band called Half Man, Half Biscuit. They write, I don't know if anyone's familiar with them in the audience. Yeah, I'm absolutely obsessed with that kind of very funny but all like stunningly romantic lyrics. So, Ode to Joyce. I absolutely love the line. It's basically a love song to everyone called Joyce. And they say, I'm going to spend my next half day with a girl called Joyce. I'm going to possibly stop at T-Bay with a girl called Joyce. You guys are mostly from the north, so you should know that T-Bay is the best service station in the UK by an absolute mile. But despite those musings, what really makes me tick, and as much as I love the things that I've mentioned, I realise that predominantly my experiences of everyday beauty are embedded in sport. If you can find me there, I'm at the back, absolutely dying in the heat because I can't run in anything above 15 degrees. I'd describe myself as an enthusiastically average runner and tennis player, and I consume sport daily, a ridiculous amount really. Sport's deeply embedded in my life, and I think that's the case, I would guess, for at least a few people in the audience today. I don't want to assume. And the technical proficiency of the sport is totally irrelevant to me. I can't walk past like a local cricket match or a football match without watching. I'm kind of compelled to stop, to drink in the scene, the kind of nick of ball on bat, the scream of elations, the vibrancy of human connection that forms around an arbitrary game and grass boundaries. I'm absolutely obsessed with it. I sincerely love sport and the sporting communities I'm a part of, as well as the ones I just happen to walk by in the street. Perhaps it seems silly, but I think I would feel pretty irreparably lost without them. It's something I do on a daily basis. So much so, when I visit a new city for whatever reason, my inclination is not to head to a gallery or a museum. Perhaps it's sacrilege to say this in a university setting, but I find them quite boring. These are places we're told that capture and distill the beauty of a culture and then reflect them back to us. I find I really jar against the palpable pressure within them to find what's in them somehow interesting or fascinating. So I tend to ignore this and head to pockets of green space to parks, to waterways, to the secret fringe lands that knit themselves to cities and towns through patchwork brownfield sites. Here I run, run by other runners with dappled skin, past footballers jinking through red grass pitches, past sage men and women in crisp whites about to bowl through an eternal summer evening. So my primary mode of sport is running. So specifically, why do I find running beautiful, both to spectate and to do? Well, I love watching people run fast. I think it's really cool. It has an almost primordial quality to it, in the sense that we kind of know how to run without being taught. You have these kind of phenoms in other sports, your kind of Roger Federers, your Lionel Messis, who it seems as though they were as good at the sport when they were 3 years old as they are when they were 33. That's very rare, but everyone can kind of run from when they're young. There's an idea by an academic called Jessie K. Luna, which forms a lot of my research. I think about it all the time. She argues that people who are really proficient at running synthesize ease and difficulty, ease and effort, and that makes for something really compelling to watch. Hopefully this video will explain. This is the most famous trail runner on the planet. He's a guy called Kilian Jornet. He's a bit mental, as this video will show. It's quite difficult to get the depth on a video on a GoPro, but that's like that. Probably running about a 5.5, 6 minute mile, so really, really quick. Just pause that. Yeah, so obviously this is incredibly steep, incredibly technical terrain. Obvious to say, but running down it is incredibly, incredibly difficult. I do some fell running and I fall over every week. I'm in a perpetual state of injury because of it. And this guy's really mastered it. He's holding a disciplined upright stance and his muscles and sinews are straining, absorbing each punishing step. He's totally keyed in. And so that's very much the effortful side of things. But on the other hand, he kind of looks, annoyingly for me, who's not very good at running in comparison, he kind of looks like he's floating. He glides across loose scree terrain in a joyous mastery of his own body and the ground. This vision of effortlessness, underwritten by sublime technique and dedication, for me is beautiful. The patter of stones deftly nudged into free fall, and the punishing yet precise planting of his foot is pretty stunning to see. It all happens in this otherworldly alpine steppe, the stillness of the landscape given an extra electricity by Journey's fluid downhill movement. And it would be really remiss of me at this point not to point out the guy filming it with a GoPro is also doing it like this and following him down. So that's, if anything, that's even more impressive. Now, as much as I'd like to be, and pretty much everyone else will never be Kilian Jornet. But I do believe, sorry, just making sure I've got the right place there. Yeah. I can't fling myself down an Andalusian goat track at a 5-minute mile pace, as much as I'd like to be. I weigh 15 stone, so it would probably end in quite a disastrous incident. But I can train my body in a really moderate way to enable me to run up and down undulating forest, brownfield and agricultural land that surrounds us and is accessible to most. Amidst the exhaustion of dragging one's body across the contours of these paths, bridleways and do not trespass single tracks, I guarantee there's at least a chance on a sloping downhill your efforts will be rewarded with a fleeting moment of joy. You can capture a small flavour of what that clip feels like. I'm lucky enough to get that running regularly around the fringes of Heslington, Fulford and Clifton, and I say this as an incredibly cynical person, which will be backed up by the other panel members, I'm sure. I really think everyone can achieve that same sense of beauty, and not through the intrinsic act of running. Moving at whatever pace through these spaces gives you the opportunity to observe the glorious minutiae of the country's sporting culture. In the last month alone, I've ran past a last-minute winner from a chaotic goalmouth scramble, prompting a pylon celebration at Fulford Football Club. I've seen my old tennis club Abergavenny beat Cardiff Castle once and celebrate like they've won Wimbledon. That is a bit of a local derby, to be fair, so we'll let them off. And I've seen a well-secured 3-year-old in a stroller being pushed by his dad at park run to a sub-22 minute 5k. It's quite humbling getting beaten by a dad who also has to push an entire buggy and a child. But it happens every week, so I've got to get used to it. And all these things I do think are beautiful. And as a final aside, kind of on running, the absolute minimum it does is to drag us away from the crushingly oppressive facets of modernity. So laptops, phones, spreadsheets. More so than walking, its inherent movement demands kind of presence of mind. And the things you notice when running with real sensory focus are beautiful. Flowers, grasses, graffiti, the unencumbered hum of the country's green spaces and fringes. I see it every day and I'm pretty dependent on it for my sanity. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Anthony, for the moving lyrical ode to running. In case it wasn't obvious, Anthony is also a widely published poet, which you might hate me for saying. Our final speaker this evening, before we open things up to a conversation, is Ben Gibb-Reid. Ben is a doctoral researcher, also funded by the White Rose College of the Arts and Humanities, in language and linguistics. His research explores phonetics and interactional variants of discourse pragmatic variables, such as like, yeah, and just, with a view to aid forensic voice comparison. That all sounds very serious, Ben. But here to argue for the beauty of slang, and with his controversial views on what to call a bread bun, it's Ben Gibb-Reid.
So yeah, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for Nicholas for planning this and my fellow panellists. Hey up, my name's Ben, and I'm going to talk about the beauty of something you've all walked in here with. I'm going to talk about your voices. I'm a linguist. That does not mean I speak lots of languages. It does mean I geek out about what people are saying. I'm not analysing what you're saying if you ask a question later, so don't worry, I'm not constantly on. But yeah, I want to talk about the beauty of slang. It's a bit of a controversial topic. Some people claim it came from the word short and language merged together. And actually, in the 1970s, there was even an article that said, is slang a word for linguists? You guys don't have to read it. It just says, maybe it is, we should probably avoid it, done. The 70s are a bit easier for academic articles. But the thing is, mainly slang is used to say it's any word or phrase that we might say, or might find someone saying, that we get judged for in an informal context. That's a pretty big pool of words. Anything you might say that someone might go, ooh, don't know why they said that. So slang really is a kind of, open field for criticism. And for me, I find slang sits in a world of judgment. Slang words have been banned in schools. There's an excellent example here from 2013, a school in London. They give the kids a list. I've been to other schools where they have lists of formality scales of, you say this word, you're going to get a detention in class. Interesting. You say this word, you'll get like a bit of a stare, a cold hard stare from your teacher. And this sense of kind of overuse of overuse of different features is a world of judgment of how people are speaking. And even beyond that, there's this kind of wider cultural narrative of a recent Radio 4 thought of the day. It was called Piracy on the Page, where this author was talking about how anyone coming up with new words, the way kids speak these days, it's linguistic piracy, like they're robbing us of something beautiful just by talking in the playground, which, interesting. I just want to point out here as well, part of my problem with a lot of this linguistic variation and my interest and passion about it is it's often punching downwards. The words that we see here, cos ain't like bear extra in it, are not the kind of words you're going to see in Parliament. The kind of words that anyone on the street might say. And actually, often anyone on the street might be someone who is from a different ethnicity or a different background than those who are in power. Food for thought. Before we get too serious, Giles Brandreth, podcast presenter, ex-politician extraordinaire, said in a blog a few years ago, he took the words for me, which is great. In my book, bad language includes not only the traditional swear words, but also the words we use all the time, but don't need to. So how do we not need a word? Has anyone used a word they think they didn't need to use? Well, maybe, But I'm here to convince you that all words that we say, everything, even the most carefully created Nicholas Dunn-McAfee presentation of a Guinness, every word counts. Even if you are casually talking to a family member on the phone and you say, hello, or hey up, or now then, all of these words matter, and they say something about ourselves. Actually, rather than existing in a world of judgment and a world of laziness, or a world, maybe in Giles's view, of stupidity, there's a world of innovation. So I want to start with Giles's least favourite word, like, one of my personal favourites. Now, I'm sure many of you in here might have varying opinions on this word. Part of our issue with the word is that in the last 50 years in writing alone, never mind speech, it's over-doubled in its use across British and American writing. So there's a bit of a thing. The more things happen, the more we're aware of it, and you go, oh, I don't like that. Also, like is multifunctional. It contains multitudes, if you like. So it could be a verb, or like trains, it could be a comparative, he looks nice, or it could be a quotative. Now, quotatives are simply features of speech which are equivalent with the word said. So a quotative like, you could either say was like, you could say went, you could say said, you could say was all. But rather than me explaining this to you, I thought I'd use someone you might not expect to use this kind of feature. So here's a little clip of Rishi Sunak from the year way back in 2022, 21, when he's running to be Conservative Party leader. How long ago was that? Does someone know? 21. 22? Okay, cool. Time is an envelope. So we're going to watch this. Listen out for him saying when he says, everyone was like, who on earth?
I popped up on this TV screen at that press conference.
I was one of them.
Right, yeah, everyone was like, who on earth is this guy standing next to the Prime Minister? And what on earth is he talking about further? Where do I find that? Right.
So it's interesting to know that Rishi Sunak uses this feature in this interview. Now you could say he's trying to be man of the people, he's trying to look cool, he's trying to not look like a tax evader. But he's just trying to portray something there that he is. But watch what he does when he uses words like. He could have said, everyone said, or he could have gone, everyone went, bleh. What he said is everyone was like. And watch what he does with his hands and his body.
I popped up on this TV screen at that press conference.
I was one of them.
Right, yeah, everyone was like, who on earth is this guy standing next to the Prime Minister? And what on earth is he talking about further? Where do I find that? Right.
He uses his hands, right? There's something about the word like which goes beyond the word said. He could have said, he said like instead. Now this is not sheer laziness, and this is not sheer acting. What this man is doing at this point is using the genius innovation, potentially has come from female teenagers based on linguistic research, of saying like, as in they thought this, they acted in this way, they portrayed this. He can portray the feelings and emotions and hand movements of what people may or may not have been saying at the time. If he said, this wouldn't really make sense, but was like does so much more. There's also, in slang words, and in all the words we use, a world of individuality. Now, the danger of asking for any interaction or starting a war in this room, what does anyone call this? Anyone want to shout up?
Bread roll.
Bread roll.
Bread cake.
Bread cake. Any more? Bun. Bap. Good. I'm hearing a good back and forth. So, just this single item has so many different words. A quick cursory Google showed me roll, bap, balm, batch, bread cake, bridie, bun, cob, lardy cake, muffin, oggy, scuffler, tea cake. That's beyond all the different combinations you can have of these words. I'm sure someone in the room will tell me that I've missed one out. But this is the thing. Even a simple, humble piece of bread has a multitude of different terms. And yeah, okay, they're equivalent, but they're not quite equivalent, are they? Because I tell you for nothing, if someone came into a sandwich shop and you were working there and they said, can I have a stotty or can I have a scuffler? You'd be like, what? It means something different. Yeah? There's something of our identity in the words that we choose. And if that's true for something simple as a bread roll, how much more for something complicated like? Now, my research is actually focused on forensic phonetics, so it's how individual our use of language is. And I found in researchers, in my studies, that speakers use words in a way that is unique, not just to communities, but to them. I took acoustic measurements of the word just. It was very laborious. I used it in a speaker comparison test. And what I found was two things. Firstly, when you compare speakers, if I just put into this system, the same kind of system we use for DNA or blood testing, and I said, separate out two people based on the use of the word just, it would go, yeah, I can do that. There's something unique in the measurements of a single word that can separate people. And even more than that, the way people say these words is in some way consistent. There's something unique about the words that we choose and the way that we're pronouncing them. And finally, I think slang exists in a world of play. I'm a big proponent for the joy of slang. I went into a school recently in Croydon. I just got them to write down any word they thought a parent or carer or teacher might not understand. And this is just one of the sheets of paper I came up with. I'm sure there's some features there we know of. Wagwan, spelled with a one, I love that. Dough for bread, okay, yeah, bear, peng, leng. Tweaking, blicking, fadsid, not a clue at all. Maybe some people here might be more aware than I am. But what a hotbed, what an absolutely incredible place of growth and change. And the lexicographer Eric Partridge, in his book on slang today and yesterday from 1933, I'm sure it's on all of our bookshelves, he says, to set forth the history of English or American slang would be to write a history of language and literature and social development and cultural development and. This is what slang represents. It represents so much more than just a lazy thing or a kind of thing to be told off for using in the wrong place. These kids are referencing video games, music, culture, and it's all about them and who they are. This is me. That's what they're saying when they use these words. Language is a tool. We need to use it to communicate to be heard, but it's also an incredible marker of identity. It's an incredible marker of innovation. I like to think of slang as the writer's room of language. All the best stuff that's coming out in the next 10 years is sitting in a school playground somewhere, being battered about. And 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, you'll be reading a news article about Giles Brandreth complaining about it all over again. I've been Ben Gibb-Reid. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben, whose comments on the Prime Minister's tax arrangements were, I'm sure, prefaced with the word allegedly. It's been a lovely chit-chat so far. What I'd love to do in the remaining 15 minutes is actually open it up to conversation, questions, to back and forth. So if I can invite our lovely panellists, Taryn, Anthony and Mel, to come back up. And you, the audience, should you have any questions for an individual, for everyone, we absolutely welcome them. I might take the chair's privilege here and just ask the first question, if I may, to everyone. Which is, you've all set out three very, very clear positions on very specific topics and why you find them beautiful. Could you talk me through something that sits outside your normal range of living, something outside your normal interest in the past day, week, month, that you found particularly beautiful and why?
I absolutely hate the heat. I just can't cope in it. And there is a real beauty in that moment when you step in front of a fan, when you're absolutely boiling.
I didn't want to start my talk with this after you mentioned the beauty in kind of attachment objects. I like to think myself as a budget Yorkshire Paddington, because I'm obsessed with marmalade. Marmalade is just the best thing in the universe. And I found my little greengrocer makes their own and sells it, and I'm in danger of buying buckets of it.
Someone from my running club told me to start eating Marmite on malt loaf and for the double malt extract. And if you're into Marmite, oh, you'll love that stuff. It's so good. It's delightful. It's really, really excellent.
And my 2 cents would be, I recently noticed this beautiful scene happening outside my window one morning. These beautiful things flying in the air. And then being an asthmatic who suffers from terrible hay fever, I realised, good God, it's pollen season. The end of days was coming. But for that split second, before that realisation of my natural inability had hit, I thought this was so beautiful. And then I started coughing, spluttering, sneezing, taking inhaler. All very drab. Do you have any questions from our lovely audience this evening? Can be to an individual, can be to everyone. Oh, yes.
So have any of
There's a microphone.
have any of you said anything different from beauty is in the eye of the beholder? Have any of you gone beyond that?
I find the thing with language is the problem that I set out at the start is that it very much the lack of beauty is in the eye of the beholder with slang. it's kind of gets judged by everyone from different angles. And actually, really, the whole point I'm trying to say with speech is everyone's voice is beautiful, and that is beyond the eye of the beholder, beyond the ear of the beholder, the ear of the behearing. I mean, the word behearing, there we go. So, but I would say maybe that is beyond the kind of idea of sense of, I've seen something beautiful, heard something beautiful, but actually no, for me, innovation is just innovation, and part of the interest in those things is that it goes beyond what people might say about it. It's still innovation, it's still important. I don't know if that answers to what you were saying.
I would say I'm also very interested, we had a bit of this evening, with the way in which what we consider beautiful is obviously tied up in canonical views of value and social value. I work on a painter and poet who has been considered low value and low status for a very long time. It's only recently, through the work of critics like Reimagining, that Dante Gabriel Rossetti has come back into critical popularity. He has never been unpopular with the public, I should say, and I'm particularly interested in that disjunct. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but it seems like the public find his work exceedingly beautiful, and critics have only just got to the right side of history on it. Marvellous, thank you very much. I believe we have another question floating over there.
Okay, I'll be brave, and I'm a scientist by training, so here we go, it's all very unfamiliar to me, but I was going to ask the linguist whether, and this comes from like my own family connections, whether the term you were, so you was, or you know, poor grammar that can be considered slang is actually a dialect, and when we correct it all the time, one day this will be considered something really very old-fashioned.
Yes, there's an amazing researcher in my department called Claire Childs who's done a bit of a look at what we call was-were and that variation. Now, I completely agree with what you said. There's a sense of, and it's difficult because we need to teach language and we need people to understand each other, so we can't just go around making noises. But there's a sense of, you know, was-were and things are, you know, there is something identity, you know, baked into that. And actually, the perception that we have of English being a standardised thing that emerged out of nothing, well, no. Before there was standard English, as it is written and codified, there were many types of English. It just wasn't called English. You know, there's kind of Anglo-Saxon, there was, you know, Norse infused Anglo-Saxon, there was all these different dialects. Those are all equally valid ways of communication. It's just that at some point the we were, rather than we was, became written down, and that, you know, became the standard for the country as a whole. It's not better or worse, I'd say.
Thank you. Any other questions? Georgia?
Thanks everyone for great talks. I'm going to try and bring this, this is for Ben again, sorry. I'll try and bring this back round to the question of beauty somehow. I thought it was fascinating. I think it's something that I've always been really interested in and has played a part in my identity, construction, and particularly the word like. And it's so inbuilt in this idea of class and intelligence. And I think when I was younger, I noticed myself saying it, and I still say it all the time, and I thought it was a bad thing. And I tried to train myself to stop using it all the time because I thought it made me sound less intelligent. But when I'm with my friends, particularly from my, you know, East London where I grew up, we all talk with every other word, and I have to make a concerted effort to try. I'm trying really hard not to say it right now. So I just wonder about that thing. Because you're right, I think it's identity, it is about beauty in the language that we use. So I suppose to try and bring it back to the point of the topic, that has been taken away through sort of generations or maybe centuries of conditioning that there's a certain way of language, and I suppose in also, as you know, with Rossetti or critic, and where we've been taught that certain things aren't beautiful, and then that becomes tied up in, you know, class structures and hierarchies. I don't know if that was a question.
It's a good thought, though. It's a lot. Don't know if, before I jump in, I thought about beauty being taken away, or should I just?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just similarly on the accent thing, I don't sound that Welsh. My dad works in Port Talbot Steelworks, and I think because of the career path I've gone down, there is a tacit pressure, whether it be very obvious or not to drop that accent, particularly in kind of university setting. Obviously now I think there's been more of an acceptance in terms of the way you have newsreaders now with regional accents, but definitely when I was 10 years ago when I was applying for university or whatever, I think it was definitely viewed as a disadvantage, and like people would maybe associate having a very strong regional accent with denigrating their intelligence, which is obviously, I was going to swear then, stop myself, a bad thing.
Lovely substitute word there.
Yeah.
I should out myself as well. Despite this bland accent, I'm from a little village outside of Scarborough, so the whole accent thing is always a kind of funny one, because I sit there and go, oh yes, I've got one of those, but not the one I think I have, and not the one I'm meant to have, and not, there's a whole question of various things going on there. But thank you for that question. It was a kind of, throw back to you, how's your experience of self-regulating? Those sort of,
I had to do a lot of work on it at a certain period, I think. I've stopped thinking about it quite so much. But it's this thing in my head, I feel it's like a tick. I can hear myself saying it when I say it. But I think it comes from that thing of, I've taught myself that it's bad to say like all the time, because I think my grandmother said it made me sound fake or something, you know, like those sort of generation. So it now is something that is a real kind of anxiety thing that I find whenever I say it, particularly in an academic context, or if I'm giving a paper, sometimes I'll say, like, when you're trying to, and then I'm thinking, oh God, I've messed up, and everyone's going to think I'm an idiot. So yeah.
There's also a disparity between almost being misbelieved if you hand someone something that you've written when you have an accent like that, and they'd be like, you didn't write that. And it's like, well, yeah, I did. It's just my written English is far superior to my spoken English, and I can't change that. I also swear a lot, and I don't do that in.
Swearing is technically slang. I didn't include any.
One of the things I find interesting about with the use of slang is that I often think when people talk about slang, they tend to refer to it as Americanized, or we're becoming too Americanized, as if it's something unique to our language. But my partner's French, and when we speak in French, I mean, my French is terrible because it's all slang, because he's the only person I talk to in French. But it's been actually a real joy not to learn to unlearn my school French and to learn what I consider to be more genuine everyday French. And that for me has been a source of, it makes the French language more beautiful to me in some ways, because it makes it friendlier, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the sense of like the knowledge of a language is much more embedded in the kind of the words you don't know from a dictionary.
Yeah, absolutely.
What words people actually say.
Yeah.
That's cool. Lovely bit of everyday beauty. We've got time for one more question if we've got a willing audience. Anyone is particularly keen to get something off their chest about beauty, ugliness, society, etc. Oh, yes.
This is a bit left field. I'm a gardener, and I think that weeds are defined by society according to what we... I guess my question is finding something beautiful really an act of a sort of personal risk that you will be judged, because you can find something. There are things we collectively decide are beautiful, but the experiences that you've all been talking about feel more personal, more like a risk of saying I find this beautiful, and the possibility of being judged for that somehow is always sitting there. That's my question.
Brilliant, thank you.
That was something that came up quite a lot in my research when I surveyed people, interviewed people. There are quite a lot of people who are attached to things that are pretty, and I like the way it looks, like this necklace kind of thing. But there are plenty of other people as well who are attached to things and they find them joyful and wonderful, but they also hide it from people. So like, I can't tell anyone because it's really embarrassing, or like, I'm only writing this because it's online and you don't know who I am, so I can tell you all about the really tattered, horrible old bear that's sitting on a bed and all that kind of thing. But I don't know, there's something, for me there's something nice in the personal nature of it as well. Finding your own personal beauty, I think, for me makes it more meaningful, because you're not kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? You're not conforming to what society says you have to find beautiful. But at the same time, there are plenty of people that you talk about art, for example, there are plenty of things that a lot of people find beautiful. So I think beauty is quite varied, as I think all of our talks have found.
I love the idea of beauty as an act of rebellion as well. You say that's a weed, but I think that's beautiful. It's kind of raising it up. But yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, taken on isolation, weeds are pretty cool. Like, this, do you classify thistle as a weed?
I've planted plenty of them on purpose, so I guess not.
Yeah.
It's also a fascinating little distinction of how far along, where are we going from flower to weed? I'm sure there's a very, very scientific reason, but I really like your sentiment, effectively, that making a judgment contrary to society about beauty might also have its own beauty to it, that running against the grain, that actually throwing the I out there against the we has a kind of benefit. You've reminded me of the work of Mary Douglas, the anthropologist. Bear with me, she wrote a famous book about dirt, which is not the most fascinating topic, but she makes it the most fascinating topic. She says dirt presupposes two systems. One is a systematic ordering of matter, e.g. stuff should be where it should be. The second is a contravention to that matter, e.g. someone's walked mud into the house. And I'm really interested by how those boundaries work, how they're reinforced, how your work as a gardener is maybe doing something more daring with those boundaries, to your point on thistles, than might otherwise appear. But thank you for the lovely question.
Thank you. Thanks for all your answers.
Marvellous. I might take this opportunity after a lovely positive answer to wrap it all up. So I want to thank our panellists again, Taryn Bell, Ben Gibb-Reid, Anthony Tomkins. I want to thank the Festival Ideas for greenlighting this slightly mad event and helping us this evening. I want to thank the White Rose College of the Arts and Humanities for kindly funding the refreshments. And thank you very much to you, our audience, for coming along on a beautiful sunny Tuesday evening to talk about silly, frilly things like slang, pints, and Norris the teddy bear. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.